الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah, we have reached line number 32 of this poem. And in this line that he's going to advise us about how we should be in relation to doing good deeds. And he reminds us of the blameworthy nature of what is called in Arabic takasul, simply laziness. And he says here, دع التكاسل في الخيرات تطلبها فليس يظفر بالخيرات كسلان. It translates as, abandon laziness in all acts of goodness you seek. A lazy person never attains any goodness. So, دع التكاسل. This is not the way that we want to be. And we should be very concerned with as believers about if we are in a state of laziness. And the believer should be someone of high aspiration. The believer should be someone that sets goals and strives to achieve them. The believer should be someone who lives a life of purpose, who doesn't waste a lot of time. The believer should be someone who doesn't like to remain idle. He's always preoccupied with some type of good. The believer be someone who is that always increasing in something. Idleness is one of the most dangerous things of all. It's one of the quickest ways to get ourselves in trouble. When we remain idle, when we don't have anything that we're doing, when we are not striving towards something. And the believer also is someone who is never satiated from good. No matter whatever it is that we achieve of knowledge, we want the higher degree of knowledge. No matter what it is that we achieve of worship, that we want to even go beyond that until that we meet our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. So at-takassul is one of these very dangerous things, and it's a part of the human condition. And it's for this reason that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sought refuge in Allah from it. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-'ajzi wal-kasal. I seek refuge in you from ajz, which is like inability, and kasal, which is laziness. And so this is something that we want to think about. And then the question is, how do we treat our laziness? How do we treat our laziness? And Imam Haddad in the Book of Assistance, in the chapter on vigilance, has a very nice section in there. If you don't have the Book of Assistance by Imam Haddad, that's a book that needs to be on the shelf of every Muslim. And so it's roughly the 4th or 5th chapter, and I would look in what he says there, all of the different ways to motivate yourself. After first beginning with the discussion of vigilance and what that means in bringing to heart that Allah Ta'ala sees you, then he says, and if you find in your soul laziness, it's just not motivated to do things, what do? And then he lists a series of things. I'll forget the total number in the exact order. He says, try this. If that doesn't work, try this. If that doesn't work, try this. If that doesn't work, try this. And you won't sincerely put that in, excuse me, into practice, save that Allah Ta'ala will revive your soul. And then it's especially important to be around good people. Imam Muhammad bin Wasi', one of the pious predecessors, he said that actually someone about Muhammad bin Wasi' said, if I ever feel a sense of laziness, that I'm not motivated to worship or I'm not motivated to increase in my religion, I go and I just gaze at Muhammad bin Wasi'. And then he said, for an entire week that I benefit from that, and I can get back into doing whatever it is that I was doing. And so this also is telling about the nature of traditional societies. Nowadays, oftentimes to be around certain teachers, you have to spend, several $1,000s to that actually get in their company. because it's just so expensive. And yes, to put on programs sometimes that you have to charge to cover the costs. But it's a shame that we have to charge anyone to learn deen. It's a shame. In reality, we're not charging people in programs like this to learn the deen. That's just going to the camp for the accommodations and the food so that we can free ourselves up to learn deen. If there was a way for us to take care of all of those costs so we could just all come together and learn, and we could offer it for absolutely free, we would do that if that was possible. Because making money off programs is a shady thing to do. We need to be very careful about that. Once you open up that door, you could very quickly pollute the very thing that you set out to do, which is to teach. You have to be very careful when it comes to that you don't make money off of the deen. And in previous times, just imagine that how the Prophet ﷺ was. Like, it's inconceivable. Oh, you have to pay to come listen. It's so utterly unfathomable that, subhanAllah, this is the sign of our times. But we should strive to the extent possible to keep the costs at bare minimum so that people can make it, and find ways to give people equal opportunity. And may Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq with this. If we can't work that out in our communities moving forward, we're not going to be very successful in the long term. And that our teachers, when I remember one summer program, people pitched in to take care of food and things like that. There was a financial need. There was a little bit of a surplus at the end. So our teacher said, how many people attended? They told him. He said, divide the money up and return a percentage based upon how many people were there to each person. Khalas. We don't want any surplus. We're not going to use it for next year. No, next year we'll deal with that when next year comes. This is the spirit, and this is how we need to be. And this is one of the reasons why they impact hearts so much, because they have no tama'. They have no desire for what's in the hands of people. They simply just want people to benefit. So being around people, great people, that are people of ijtihad and are striving spiritually to draw near to Allah Ta'ala, that has a profound impact upon you and helps motivate you in the spiritual path. So I would look at that chapter because it's extremely helpful. And I think the first thing Imam Haddad says is that be in a state of muraqabah. That's the number one thing that should motivate us, is bringing to heart that Allah sees you and that you're going to return to Him. But he says if that doesn't work for you for some reason, imagine that you have two angels, one on your right shoulder, one on your left shoulder. And he mentions a number of other things, among them reading about the reward for certain acts that if you do them, this is what you will attain. And I think he ends with the recollection of death. If nothing else works, reflect on the fact that death could pounce in any moment. So anyhow, that's very helpful, and this is the way that we treat our spiritual laziness. And the opposite of laziness is what we're commanded to. And so that Allah Ta'ala that tells us in the Quran, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ, is that hasten to do good. وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةً, and hasten to the forgiveness of your Lord. مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةً أَرْضَهَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, that hasten to the forgiveness of your Lord, and to a paradise the breadth of which is that like the heavens and the earth. عِدَّةُ الْمُتَّقِينَ has been prepared for the people of taqwa. وَهَكَذَا. This is how we're supposed to be. In another hadith that our Prophet said, بَادِرُوا بِالْأَعْمَالِ فِتَنًا, and this is very profound, and that our Prophet recognized that there was going to be fitan, and he was aware of this. Trials, tribulations of different sorts, fitna. It's a very important word. And the essence of a fitna is you're in a very difficult situation and there's no easy way out. It's not a matter of black and white. It's a matter of shades that one thing being much worse than the other. Sometimes you're in a situation where there's a bad option and a good option. But then other times you're forced to be in situations where there's no good option and you can't get out of the situation. And you're still required to act. And sometimes you're not acting, it means not acting. And then you're supposed to choose the lesser of the two evils in that particular situation. And if you look at many of the situations that millions and millions of Muslims are in right now as we speak across the world. Many of them are in situations like this, where it's fitna. There's no easy way out. The water is murky. If you put your hand in, it's going to get murkier, and you're likely to cause even more problems. And this is a very difficult state to be in. And then our Prophet did give us guidance even in those situations. There is a special fiqh for how to be in a time of fitna, mentioned in numerous ahadith of our Prophet ﷺ, where in those situations you actually end up doing oftentimes something entirely different than you would do in another situation. And this is detailed in the books of the scholars. And one of the great authors in modern times who's done great work when it comes to this is Habib Abu Bakr Mashur, where with istiqra, he's looked at the various narrations and he'll summarize how it is that you should be. And in general, in a time where things are unclear and there's fitna, the two most important things that you want to be wary of is taking part in that fitna with your tongue or shedding any blood. Shedding your blood might seem like it's easy, but if you've lost family members and you've lost close friends and it's happening right at your doorstep, it's not as easy to be aware of that. From a distance it might be. But the bigger one for us, where relatively speaking we have a fair degree of security compared to that other people on the face of this earth. And obviously there's different neighborhoods in the United States that have different degrees of security, but be careful to take part in a fitna with your tongue and thinking that you have a perspective on that particular matter when it's really not clear, and jumping the gun and getting involved, whether it's online or in person or whatever way. This is something that we need to be very careful of. So our Prophet is saying is that be wary that there will be times of fitna. So hasten to do a'mal while you still can. Do righteous works now while you can, before a time comes where it might be difficult. And the Prophet then described these fitan as qita al-layl al-mudlam, like successive darkness of the night. As night goes on, it just gets darker and darker. يُصْبِحُ رَجُلٌ مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي كَافِرًا. There will be a time where someone will enter into the morning as a believer, but by nightfall, the fitna will be so strong that they would have left Islam in one day, half a day. وَيُمْسِي مُؤْمِنًا وَيُصْبِحُ كَافِرًا. And that he will enter into the evening as a believer, and then by morning have disbelieved. This is very serious. And if we're not yet in that time, you could see this time approaching. You can at very least see the muqaddimat, the precursors to what our Prophet is describing, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What is one of the main reasons people do this? يَبِيعُ دِينُهُ بِعَرَضٍ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. They are ready to sell their religion for a small price of the world. Just something of the world. They'll sell their religion for something of the world. But keep in mind, it's a fitna. Some might say that, why would someone ever sell their religion for the world? If you are going through a state of intense poverty, if you're in a state where you don't have that even safety or food to put on the table and so forth, how do we act? Right? It's a little bit, if it gets a little bit warm in here, we start getting uncomfortable. Right? If, we find a mouse in our cabin, hopefully none of you have found that this year. Don't worry. Well, I'm not going to say this year, then it's going to make it seem like people have found them in the past. And people are going to start worrying. We would panic. And these are small little things. What if we were really tried? Right? What if we were really, really tried? Trials for us might be like, oh, my neighbor's got a washing machine in their cabin, but I don't have one in mine. Right? Those are the difficulties for us, is that choosing what food and trying to remain healthy with the buffet and all the food that they're serving. Those are our tribulations. And there's a beautiful story where there was someone one time who had no food to put on the table for dinner. And he had a conversation with his wife, and he said, don't worry, food's going to come. He said, going without food, he said, that's the station of the Sahaba. We haven't reached that station. Don't worry, food is going to come. And lo and behold, someone knocked on the door and sent them dinner. And so these are how these people are. Anyhow, the opposite of laziness is striving to do whatever you can from good and implementing these words of Allah Ta'ala. فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ. So then in the next line, he says, and we're on line now 33, لا ظل للمرء يعرى من تقى ونهى وإن أظلته أوراق وأفنان. So dhil literally is shade, and it is used in this sense in a figurative way, is that no man will be shaded in the sense of, here the dhil is their protection, or it could even be used for honor, okay, which is a type of protection in society. So no honor is there for a person who has no taqwa and intellect, even if they live in luxury and in splendor. And you could also say here is that la dhilla yawm al-qiyamah, there is no shade on the day of judgment for anyone that doesn't have intellect or taqwa. Now these forms that he uses here, this is obviously very eloquent. Nuhan wa tuqan. So tuqa is another way of saying taqwa in the Arabic language. And the nuha, that some will say it's a jama' of nuhya, which is one of the words for intellect, aqal. So he's saying is that the key really here is to have aqal, to have intellect, and to also be a person of taqwa, someone that knows the commands and the prohibitions, is mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, puts everything in its proper place, has an ability to see truth and to follow it, and to know what falsehood is and to avoid it, to know what one should be doing, one should not be doing, to know the different shades in any given situation. So these are the two things that we need. And what he's really trying to get at here is, this is where true honor lies. The man or woman that used to impress the Prophet ﷺ was the person of taqwa. This should be the number one criterion in relation to how it is that we view people and the people that we are closer to or that we might keep a bit of distance from. Are they people of taqwa? Are they known to know their deen and to observe their religion and to avoid certain things? This is the number one criterion. The second part of the line that says, وَإِنْ أَوْظَلَّتُ أَوْرَاقٌ وَأَفْنَانُ, that awraq, he translates it here as even if they live in luxury and in splendor. That awraq are leaves on trees, and afnan are branches. And so here you see that la dhilla, you see the word dhil, and then you see the word al-dhalla. So dhil is shade in its basic meaning. Al-dhalla is to give shade. So even if he is shaded by leaves and branches, and this is referring to the type of life that he lives, i.e. a life of luxury and splendor. So oftentimes, and what he's really trying to get at in this line and in the next two lines, he's really now trying to advise us about how it is that we view people. What are the criterion whereby which that we judge individuals? And here, judge in the sense of our perspective in how we view things. And this is really important. We're not necessarily judging a person for something that they do. We have to have the right perspective. And we're all watching the news. Some of us are reading various magazines of different sorts, that we are aware of what's happening around us. And sometimes we're impressed by certain people for various reasons. And this is what we have to be really careful of. Why are we impressed with certain people? Why do we incline towards certain people? And we need to be very careful. It doesn't mean that you can't benefit from people and benefit from what's out there. You can, but you got to be very careful. Because what you're exposed to is not neutral. It's oftentimes you think that you're getting one thing, but that thing that you think you're getting a lot with it. And this is why we have to be very clear. Dunya ultimately is not the criterion for which we judge who we should be with and who we should not be with. That is not the criterion. The way the vast majority of people are, as we will see in what he's going to say after this is the number one criterion. And the more dunya, in whatever manifestation that has, whether it's wealth, whether it's status, or power, or even looks, or whatever, that tends to be the criterion. So that you might find people even that give preferential treatment to one child because they think that child's cuter than another child, solely based upon how they look. Right? That's clearly deficient. You might find them mistreating people solely based upon that criterion. Is it this person looks like this person looks like that? Or that this person is from such and such a place, this person is from such and such a place, this, and so forth and so on. This, yes, there is a degree to which our Prophet said, نَزِّلُ النَّاسِ مَنَازِلُهُمْ, that interact with people based upon that their backgrounds, and i.e. what it is that they have. There is a degree of truth to that. But as a basis, we deal with everyone justly and in the very best of ways, in the way that he previously described, cheerfully and amicably and so forth. So really what he's trying to tell us here in this line is that on the Day of Judgment, or even in the world, is that there is no honor for the person who is not a person of taqwa and a person of intellect. This is what we should strive to be. And these lines of poetry that we are reading, they strengthen our intellect and they strengthen our deen. Because you need intellect to understand what is happening around you so that you can distinguish between things, that you can see through things, and you can know what it is that you need to do. And even if people think that they can hide behind their dunya here in this world, is that definitely in the next that they will not be able to do that. So then he goes on to speak about a similar meaning. وَالنَّاسُ أَعْوَانُ مَنْ وَالَتْهُ دَوْلَتُهُ وَهُمْ عَلَيْهِ إِذَا عَادَتْهُ أَعْوَانُ. People are your friends when the dunya is your friend, and your enemy when it turns against you. Now it's just really interesting to note, do you remember when we said this was studied in Khorasan and in other places, in schools? So you would have younger people memorizing these lines of poetry and knowing its meanings. Maybe even in the preteen years, definitely in the teenage years. And just imagine if your 15-year-old child had memorized a poem like this, knew its meanings and its implications. Think about how they would be positioned then, with everything we've been talking about, because this is replete with benefit. Think about if they were aware of that when they go to college, and they were aware of these meanings, and they were wise, and they knew how to interact with people, and they had realistic expectations, and all of the other things we've been talking about. That would be pretty powerful. It shows you how advanced Muslim civilization was, and how mature people were. And with this whole idea of an extended childhood and this arbitrary age of 18, and really this extended childhood that has been created, we've lost a lot of this. So you even have 40-year-old adults that are extremely immature and haven't learned what you should have learned by age 10 or age 15. And so this is very serious. We need to protect the fitrah of our children, protect their natural disposition, but you don't want to raise a sheltered child that doesn't know how to interact with the world. So it's that fine line between exposing them with what they need to be exposed to gradually. You preserve the fitrah, of course, but you also need to train them and give them the knowledge that they need to enter into the world. They're definitely not going to get that in a public school. And they're not going to get that either, unfortunately, in a quote-unquote Islamic school. And it's highly unlikely they're going to get it in a Sunday school education. And if they spend time studying with people of knowledge, they're starting the path then to hopefully get some of what it is that they need. But we as a community need to take this seriously and really think about what our children need and what we need first and foremost to really interact in this world in which we live. This is of the utmost importance. We need to make them aware of its realities and find ways to do so. And how to do that when we're all so busy and we work long hours and we come home and all we do is just have a quick dinner with them, and we're just trying to keep them off a device, and do we even have a conversation? We see them for about 30 minutes, and we go to sleep, we wake up the next day, and on the weekend we're driving all over the place to some game, and they want to do something else in the car, and we don't have time, or we're on the phone, or we don't take the time to do this. And sometimes as parents, we don't have the ability to do it even if we wanted to. So we need to, the first step is recognition that, okay, we're falling short here, this is something that we need to do, and then figure out how it is that we are going to do it. So the nature of people are as follows, is that when you tend to have dunya, and man walatuhu dawlatuhu, ay aqbalat alayhi dunya, when people tend to have dunya of different sorts, whether it's again, wealth, status, anything of that nature, is that they tend to have friends. And when people lose that dunya or never had it in the first place, they tend to be neglected by other people or by society at large. And this is a reality. And obviously this is a sad reality. And he's mentioning this not so that we can confirm that reality, so that we can, on the contrary, be the opposite and do the right thing and not fall into what everybody else is falling into. That's not how we want to be, where we are just a person of aghrad. We have ulterior motives. We like so-and-so, they lose that position, they lose their wealth, and all of a sudden, oh, next. That's not how we are. We establish relationships for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, and every relationship that we establish with every single person, we want it to be a permanent relationship, defined as extending beyond this transitory world into eternity in the next world. This is what we want. Every person that we meet, that they eventually become like a family member and a part of our extended family, from the family of belief, of brotherhood and sisterhood for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, that we try our best to remain in contact and be with and see and keep in touch with while we're here in this world, but then ultimately meet in the next world. This is how true people are. And they don't want anything else. And yes, that you might have certain ways that you benefit from some of your friends in one way or another, and that's perfectly fine. But that's worldly benefit is not the criterion for which that we build our relationships. It's for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. We don't want to be like these people. And this word that he used here is very eloquent, dawla. Most people, when they hear the word dawla, they think of a state, right? Like a country, government of some sort. And it is interesting to note the root of this word, dala yadulu, is for things to change from time to time. Yani intaqala min hal ila hal. You say dala dahr, is that things changed over time. So it is just interesting to note that when you think about a dawla, all you have to do is study a little bit the rise and fall of civilizations. And that there's a civilization that's on the rise, and then that civilization falls. There's another civilization that rises, and another civilization falls. And for some reason, people in any time are so deluded that they almost think that they're immune to the sunnah of Allah Ta'ala in creation. No one is immune to that. Not any of the countries or the states or the empires of the past or the monarchies or whatever else that they were. And none in the present time either. And in fact, is that the things are so frail in the globalized world. There's so much interdependence and so much interconnection. The smallest little thing that happen that devastate everything, the world as we know it. It could be very small. And obviously we don't want devastation to happen. We want people to thrive and so on. But we need to recognize we are not immune to the sunnah of Allah Ta'ala. And sometimes people from very powerful countries think that they are. We need to be aware that there's a rise and fall of civilizations, and ultimately, if you're with Allah, that's what matters. So Allah uses this word in the Quran in Surah Al Imran. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And these days of, in brackets, victory and defeat, is that we cause them to happen among people. So there's times of victory and there's times of defeat. You have ups and you have downs. But then Allah says, وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So that Allah can come to know who truly believes. وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. And then He might take martyrs from among you. وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ. Allah does not love the transgressors, the tyrants, those who exceed all bounds, the oppressors. So how are we in relation to all of these changes? Are we people of Iman and then follow the dictates of it? Or are we people that fall short and then oppress our own selves and other people for worldly reasons and because of the vices that we carry in our own souls? This is the big question. But there is going to be changes. There's going to be a rise and fall of civilization. Things are going to happen. And when people have dunya or they don't have dunya, the vast majority of people will, if they have dunya, they'll be with them. But then, if they find someone who has more dunya, they'll leave that person for that other person. Or if they feel that they can get somewhere, that by being with so-and-so, then they'll do that. And if you've ever been around and this is the nature of people always, but especially in more elitist circles, and it is absolutely disgusting, is that when people see you as a line of their CV, that, if I get to know him, maybe there's a door that that person can open for me, so that then I can mention that I did this, or I can mention that I did that. And then if they see someone who can't help them in any way, right, they just give you the cold shoulder. What is that? That is just disgusting. That we need to be far from this as believers. We should be people that love all human beings in creation from the standpoint that Allah Ta'ala created them, and want to be a source of inspiration and guidance for everybody that is around us, and to that work together for bir and taqwa, piety and mindfulness of Allah Ta'ala. وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. And work together, striving towards piety and God consciousness. Now, so then also similar in meaning is the next line number 35, where he says here, سَحْبَانُ مِنْ غَيْرِ مَالٍ بَاقِلٌ حَصِيرٌ وَبَاقِلٌ فِي ثَرَى الْمَالِ سَحْبَانُ. So this requires a little bit of unpacking. So Sahban ibn Wa'il was one of the most eloquent of the Arab. And he was so eloquent that they would use him. They would say that someone is afsah min Sahban. They are more eloquent than Sahban, because he reached the peak of eloquence. So they would use him as a gauge for eloquence. And then Baqil is the opposite, Miskin. He was someone that was known to be extremely inarticulate, which is kind of a nice way of saying it. And he was very poorly spoken. So you have someone who's well-spoken, i.e. eloquent, or you have someone who is poorly spoken and inarticulate. And so that they would say that a'ya min baqil, is that this person is more poorly spoken than this individual baqil, or more inarticulate than baqil. So they're the opposite. What is he trying to say here is that Sahman, someone who's known to be very eloquent, is that if he doesn't have wealth, he will be considered to be in the minds of people like Baqil. And Baqil, even though that he's very inarticulate, if he has wealth, he will be considered in the minds of people to be like Sahban. And this is actually very deep. This is actually very, very deep. How many people really know what they're talking about? But because they don't have wealth to publish a book from a well-known publisher, no one even considers what it is that they have to say. And how many people are speaking nonsense, but because they have access to wealth, they can publish that nonsense and people eat it up and it becomes a national bestseller. This is the reality of our time. And so if you include in here not only wealth, but status and power, it also takes on a new meaning. When people speak from the standpoint of authority, they're speaking on behalf of a well-known organization or a well-known university or a well-known institute. Their words carry a lot more weight in the minds of people. And you could have someone who is actually much more intelligent than knows what that topic much better than them, that's not a part of that infrastructure. But people reject what it is that they have to say, simply for that reason. And then you add the various degrees here of, how should I say it without being too controversial? Well, I'm just not going to say it. But anyhow, there's various degrees of what you could put into question that this particular organization or authority or institute or whatever, even if it's known to people, we have to use our brains and to think about, wait, do they have any ulterior motives? Do they have vested interest in this particular area? Is there a reason that they would incline towards this more than this? And unfortunately, we as Muslims, we were talking about this yesterday, just drinking the Kool-Aid. Is that so-and-so said, and this person is the expert, I'm eating it up all day long. This is how we have to be. And we do respect expertise as believers, undoubtedly. But what really is expertise in the day and age where so many of the scales of knowledge have been upset and turned upside down? And all you have to do is, there's many books out there about this, but just read the chapter. Some of the chapters, don't read it. In Chris Hedges' book, The Empire of Illusion, about the corporatization of knowledge. Read that chapter. If you want to know the state of knowledge in the world in which we live, and the universities that are teaching students that are then now leading these companies that are doing the various things that they're doing in the world, it's very scary. What type of knowledge is really out there? And we need to be aware of this as a community and to critique this as a community and to know where we lie in light of it. And it obviously is an uphill battle. But this is very real. If you don't have wealth on your side, people might not listen to you. Even if you're extremely eloquent, or you could say, know what you're talking about. And you might be a very unintelligent person who's inarticulate in reality, but because you have wealth, you're just spewing your nonsense here and there, and people eat it up all day. And without mentioning names, I don't like going into names. Just look at the most popular talk shows and the most popular talk show hosts. And the people that are, the amount of people that are watching this on a daily basis and eating it up. It's shocking. It's utterly shocking. And especially if you've kind of distanced yourself from the world of TV for a while, and then you first come back to it and you'll just see something, you're like, how could an Adami, a human being that has, or at least should have, an intellect, listen to that? Like, it's unbelievable, the state of human beings and the degree of decadence. It's unbelievable. And what a blessing from Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to have teachings that really fulfill us as human beings, that really teach how it is that we should be thinking, what it is that we should be talking about, what type of perspectives that we have. So this is a big one here. And I'm trying to, in a very inarticulate way, point to some of its meanings, but this is a big one here, and especially the implications of this, because when it comes to knowledge, you have to also talk about the power structure that relates to knowledge. And this is a big part of the world in which we live. And the societies in which we live understand the importance of knowledge. And there's a power structure behind that. And this has been the way from the time of the colonial period. And one of the great examples of that is when Napoleon comes to the shores of Egypt and he brings with him a team of scientists that wanted to do a comprehensive study of Egyptian society. And why was that done? For many reasons, one of them being to essentially state to the Egyptian people, and by extension, that other countries that were being militarily and politically dominated, not only can we dominate you militarily, but also in relation to knowledge. We know more about you than you know about your own selves. And so one of the sister terms of genocide has always been epistemicide. In other words, killing the way that people know. Defining, in a more lighter way of saying it, defining the way that people know. And that stating for them how it is that you can know. In trying to eliminate their epistemologies. And this is why, at a certain level, we have to be firm as believers and simply not care what people think. Revelation comes first. Of all knowledge, this comes first. This is the highest form of knowledge of all, is wahi. Intaha al-amr. There's no conversation after that. It's just first. And we live in a society that has turned the scales upside down. And many of the people that we're dealing with society will never ever accept that. No matter how we explain, no matter what it is that we do, no matter how articulate, they're never going to accept that. There are certain people that will never accept that. But for the believer, revelation comes first. This is the highest form of knowledge of all. Khalas. It is much more important and it is absolutely needed for us to benefit from any of the rational or experimental sciences. Even though we live in a time where now those are the sciences, and especially the experimental, that people are placing so much focus on and have so much faith in. But the scales have been turned around. And yes, that we need to articulate that in a good way. But for the believer, that has to be in your heart. We believe in Allah and His Messenger. Khalas. And we believe that the knowledge that our Prophet ﷺ was given is the highest form of knowledge. And it is through that knowledge that it opens up the door for us to understand all of the types of knowledge and to be successful in this world and the next. A lot more could be said here, but for time's sake, we have to keep moving. So then he goes on to say in line number 36, لا تودع السر والشائن يبوح به فما رأى غنما في الدو سرحان. So there's some hard words here that you end up having to look up. So a washa is someone who slanders. He's someone who informs other people things against your will. Washa. And baha yabuhu is to divulge something. It's to expose something. And here, it's about the sir, secrets. There's certain things that you tell people in confidence that you don't want them to tell other people. And the people that do this are some of the worst people of all. If someone tells you something, and our Prophet even said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if someone just as much turns to kind of look if people are hearing and then tells you something, it is haram for you to tell anyone else. It's a sir, it's a secret. If people confide in you, their secrets, their problems, their defects, something they're going through, something they're struggling with, you can't tell anyone else. And the only time that you really can, if the situation is so grave that you feel like there's going to be harm to the individual and to really help. Other than that, no. And then in that situation, you can only tell one person who can really help, not someone who you just think can help. And if you only need one, you tell one. If you need to tell two, you could tell two. Other than that, you can't. You have to keep their secrets. And again, this gets back to these traits that have been lost. The vast majority of people are they're not very scrupulous when it comes to this. People will tell them things, the first opportunity, they'll just tell a whole bunch of other people and be like, don't tell anyone, but kada. And the same person, don't tell anyone, but between me and you, kada. And so we need to be careful about this. And so he's saying here that don't tell your secrets to someone that you know is going to tell them to someone else, is going to slander you, defame you, inform others against your will. And we'll come back to this, because then the second part is, فَمَا رَأَى غَنَمًا فِي الدَّوِّ سِرْحَانُ. Wolves cannot be made shepherds of sheep in the wilderness. So just as you're obviously not going to hire a wolf, you don't hire a wolf because they're an animal, you're not going to put a wolf in charge of the sheep. Right? Wolf eats sheep. You're obviously not going to put a wolf in charge of sheep. And so telling your secrets to someone that is disloyal or is not trustworthy, he translates it here as traitor, I would have probably found a different word, is like leaving wolves to eat your sheep, and you don't have a ra'i, a shepherd, to make sure that they safely go out during the day and then come back at night. This is the reality. So this is something that we need to be aware of. Now, how do we know the person is trustworthy or not? Some people have more emotional intelligence than others. But ideally, you actually want to test people. And before you bring someone really close, it's a really good idea to test them a little bit. And not just to bring them too close to you too quickly. And they actually mentioned this, is that some of them, before they would really take a brother for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, they would test them a little bit. And do something specifically in this story to like anger them or to do something to them. And then send someone else to talk to them to see what is it they would say. Would they mention what happened or not? Did they mention, and see what happens, see what kind of person this is. And even if we don't end up doing that, because you got to be a little bit careful when you do that, if someone is mentioning to you the secrets of someone else, you have to know that they will one day mention your secrets. So how are people when you mention other people? Do they just jump on board in the conversation and, yeah, I saw him, and I saw her, or are they people that be like, well, actually, I think she's a good person, or actually, I think he's a good person, and kind of subtly, or even not so subtly, steer the conversation in a different direction? The way people are with you is the way they will be against you. Know that for sure. How are people? How do they talk? Do they openly backbite other people? Do they openly talk ill about other people or other institutions? The way of the true people of Allah is that they don't get their tongues used to speaking ill about anyone. And we should always remember, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir," whoever believes in Allah on the last day, فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. Say good or remain silent. The true people of Allah don't spend time speaking ill about other people. And they only speak, usually, almost always in general, unless it's absolutely necessary, they're asked about something specific to clarify. And that's something that might need to be done. But other than that, there's no need. Why? It's a waste of time. It's a sign of a lowly person to do this. And then these same people that we see doing this with other people, we need to be very careful and to be wise. Don't tell them your secrets. Don't expose yourself to them. Don't share vulnerability with everybody. Make sure there's a trust there. Because some people pick up on certain things and then, unfortunately, because of their vile nature, use them against you eventually. And that's not how we want to be. And these people are like wolves, unfortunately. There are wolves out there. And if people are being like wolves, we need to learn not to be like sheep. But it's not good to be a wolf. But it's good to be a wolf to ward off someone's wolf-like nature, to protect yourself. That's obviously good, because you don't have to set yourself up to be devoured by a wolf. But What kind of ideal situation is that? That's not the ideal situation of how we're supposed to be in humanity. But the key is also when you see people that are more sheep-like, that you don't be a wolf. So you learn the balance, and then you have good relationships. And then we'll end on these last two lines, which kind of go hand in hand. لا تحسب الناس طبعا واحدا فلهم غرائز لست تحصيهن ألوان. Do not deem people to all be of the same temperament. They have differing dispositions whose types, I would prefer types here than colors, cannot be encompassed. So again, this is, you see how advanced this was. If this is being taught to young men and women in a religious school and they're memorizing this, they're being taught about temperaments and people's nature and how people aren't the same. People have different nature. These are some of the most read books today in the corporate world. Learning that how to interact with different employees and different ways of communication and different ways of leadership. A lot of it gets back to this. And this is a knowledge that we have had traditionally as Muslims. And we have a lot of details in a religious frame, but we have to study it. People don't have the same nature. They don't have the same temperament. And it's one of the most eye-opening things you'll ever do is if you study temperaments. I really believe it's life-changing when you start to study temperaments. And it's one of the best ways to find out about your own faults, spiritually, first and foremost, in treading the path of drawing near to Allah Ta'ala. When you come to learn about the temperaments and you come to learn about how it is that you are and what you're susceptible to, you know then what you need to work on. So before we even talk about interacting with other people and learning about other people, we do it first and foremost for your own self, to learn about your own self and your own faults. Because if you don't know your own self, there's no way that you're going to really be able to have a healthy relationship with anyone else, whether it be a friend or a spouse or whatever else, someone that you're working with. You have to know yourself first and foremost. And then once you know yourself, spiritually, yes, that's the path to knowing Allah too, but it's also the way that you come to learn about how to interact with other people. And then secondarily, we learn the temperament so that we know then how to interact with various types of people. This is something that I hope becomes, at least at a basic level, part and parcel of what we teach that people, even in a madrasa system, and by extension, the community. People aren't the same. There's different ways that you have to interact with different people, and you have to have empathy, and you have to go out of your way to understand even beyond temperament. People are from different backgrounds. They're of different ethnicities. They're from different types of families. They had different life experiences. People are different. And when you understand that, as a starting point then, you won't rush to any conclusion when you have that initial encounter with them. And maybe they're a little bit standoffish. Well, maybe there's reasons why they're like that. Maybe it's a temperament. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they've been burnt in the past. Whoa. But if you're at least aware of that, then you can take the next step and do what it is that you need to do to build that bridges of communication and so forth and so on. And again, the goal here really is that we thrive as individuals and a community, despite our differences, and that we move from the differences we move from a state where differences divide us to a state where the differences actually that bond us further and they make us stronger, and that's totally possible. And if we could really understand this point and think about how we as a community, it's within our reach to make major strides in solving some of the key issues that this society is still plagued with. I'm talking about living in a place like the United States of America. We could make great strides with what we have as believers if we have the courage and the ability to learn our deen as it is and to put it into practice. And I'm not going to say we would necessarily eradicate the problem, but we could make great strides. And we could show people that how it could be done. And in the process, there would be a lot of people. There would be a lot of people that come on our side and see the truth of these teachings that Allah Ta'ala has blessed with. And وَمَا كُلُّ مَاءٍ كَالسُّدَّاءٍ لِوَارِدِهِ نَعَمْ وَلَا كُلُّ نَبْتٍ فَهُوَ سَعْدَانُ. And this simply translates as, no water is as pure and sweet as sadda', and not all pastures are as nourishing as sa'dan. And that sadda' is that well that was very known amongst the Arab as being the most pleasant and the sweetest of water. And so this is why that they say it like this, is that ma'un wala kasadda. Right? It's water and it tastes good, but it's not like the water of sadda, which is known to be the very sweetest and best of all water. And then likewise is that sa'dan was a particular place or a particular type of herbage that grew in the wilderness, and that it was considered to be the best place to take the camels to pasture. And so that when the camels would eat this pasture, it was known that their bodies would go strong and that they would have a lot of milk and so forth and so on, and there would be a lot of fat in them. And so as they say is that mar'a, there's pasture, but it's not like the pasture of sa'dan. And so essentially what he's saying here is that not everybody's the same. Just as all the water is not the same, pasture is not the same. People have different natures. They have different temperaments. And then they've gone through various experiences where people are different. And thus that we can't take everybody, that we can't interact with every single person in the exact same way. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq to put these very precious pieces of advice, these very blessed aphorisms into practice, and to be people who are intelligent, Ya Rabbil Alameen, aware of their surroundings, and inshaAllah Ta'ala remain firm upon the truth of La ilaha illa Muhammadur Rasulullah, and extend our hands to that be sources of inspiration and help for all of those that are around us. May Allah Ta'ala bless us to learn this deen and to put it into practice, into that experience the fruits of doing so, and inshaAllah Ta'ala be means for the spreading of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq in all of our affairs and bless us in these latter days of this retreat, on Friday and then tomorrow and then early Sunday. May they be filled with barakah and immense blessings for all of us and our families and all of those that we left behind, and for the ummah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And finally, we just want to extend a welcome to all of those that are joining us for the weekend. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban. Inshallah, that we all close out this retreat in the very best of ways with immense benefit for all. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.